The first thing I noticed wasn't the flashing red and blue lights. It was the silence. The kind of silence that settles over a crowd the instant everyone realizes they've been standing on the wrong side of history. Dozens of my neighbors lined the gravel road outside my ranch, shoulder to shoulder, phones raised high, expecting to record the moment I was finally forced off land my family had owned for nearly 80 years. Just beyond them stood the entire HOA board, dressed like they were attending some victory celebration instead of an eviction. Their president, Linda Mercer, wore a crisp white blazer and the satisfied smile of someone who believed she'd already won. Behind her, two deputies waited beside a stack of eviction paperwork. Linda glanced toward me and folded her arms. "I told you this day was coming," she called loudly enough for everyone to hear. "You should have left when we gave you the chance." I looked across my pastures where my cattle stood undisturbed beneath the Texas morning sun. My grandfather had built every fence by hand. My father had taught me to ride horses before I was old enough to reach the stirrups. Every inch of this ranch carried memories no amount of money could replace. Yet these people acted as if it already belonged to them. One of the board members laughed. "You can save yourself the embarrassment," he said. "Pack what's left and go." Around them, whispers spread through the crowd. "I heard he ignored every HOA notice. They say he owes years of fines. I guess nobody's above the rules." I kept my eyes on Linda. "You've made one mistake after another," I said calmly. She smirked. "No," she answered. "You did." Without another word, she motioned toward the deputies. One stepped forward, carrying the court documents. "Sir," he began carefully, "we've been asked to—" The sound of tires crunching over gravel interrupted him. Every head turned toward the entrance gate. 3 black sheriff's SUVs rolled onto my property in perfect formation. They weren't expected. Neither was the unmarked county investigator's truck, following close behind. The first SUV stopped only a few yards from the HOA board. The county sheriff stepped out slowly, adjusting his hat before surveying the entire scene. His expression wasn't angry. It was disappointed. Linda hurried toward him with a confident smile. "Sheriff Collins," she said cheerfully. "Perfect timing. We're enforcing a lawful eviction. We'd appreciate your assistance removing him." The sheriff didn't answer. Instead, he looked directly at me. I gave a slight nod. He returned it. Then he turned back to Linda. "Mrs. Mercer," he said evenly, "I'd like everyone on the HOA board to remain exactly where they are." Her smile faded. "I'm sorry?" "You heard me." Confused murmurs rippled through the crowd. One board member stepped forward. "What's this about?" The sheriff reached into a folder handed to him by the county investigator. When he spoke again, every word landed like a hammer. "You are all being detained pending arrest for conspiracy, fraud, filing false property records, attempted unlawful eviction, and multiple felony violations involving county land records." The silence shattered. "What?" Linda gasped. "That's impossible. You can't be serious." One board member actually laughed, convinced it had to be some misunderstanding. The sheriff didn't react. Deputies moved past me, not toward my porch, but straight toward the HOA board. Handcuffs clicked. Neighbors lowered their phones in disbelief. Someone whispered, This wasn't supposed to happen." Linda spun toward me, panic replacing every ounce of confidence she'd shown only seconds earlier. "You did this!" she screamed. I looked her in the eyes. "No," I replied quietly. "You did." Then the county investigator opened a weathered leather file that hadn't seen daylight in decades, and everything the HOA believed about my ranch changed forever. Most people who drove past my ranch saw nothing more than weathered fences, open pasture, and a modest ranch house sitting beneath a line of century-old live oaks. I saw my family's entire history. My name is Ethan Walker. I'm 46 years old, and for the past 23 years I've made my living as a cattle rancher outside Boerne, Texas, about 40 miles northwest of San Antonio. Ranching isn't glamorous. Most mornings begin long before sunrise, and most nights end with sore muscles, dusty boots, and the satisfaction of knowing you earned every dollar the hard way. I never wanted skyscrapers, luxury cars, or million-dollar investments. All I ever wanted was to protect the land my grandfather, Walter Walker, bought in 1948 after returning home from World War II. He used to tell me, "Son, land remembers the people who take care of it." As a kid, I never understood what he meant. As a man, I did. Every fence post reminded me of him swinging a hammer with hands rough enough to sand lumber smooth. Every creek crossing reminded me of my father teaching me to drive an old tractor that stalled more often than it ran. Even the faded red barn, patched together after countless Texas storms, felt less like a building and more like another member of the family. When Dad passed away 8 years earlier, he left me only one instruction: don't let anybody take this place. I promised him I wouldn't. For years, life remained exactly the way I liked it. I knew every rancher within 20 miles. We borrowed equipment from one another without paperwork. If somebody's cattle got loose, everyone showed up to help before anyone even asked. There wasn't much drama. Then, everything changed. About 3 years before the eviction attempt, a massive housing development began creeping toward our side of the county. What had once been rolling pasture slowly transformed into rows of identical two-story homes with stone entrances, decorative fountains, and banners advertising luxury country living. The developers gave the neighborhood a polished name: Silver Creek Estates. Ironically, there wasn't a creek anywhere near it. At first, I figured we'd simply become neighbors. I wished them well. Some of the new families waved whenever they passed my entrance. Kids stopped to watch my horses from the road. Every now and then I'd answer questions about cattle or let local school groups visit during spring. Everything felt peaceful until construction reached the property bordering my western fence. One afternoon, while repairing a broken gate, I noticed several men in reflective vests walking along my fence line, carrying surveying equipment. I climbed onto my ATV and drove over. "Morning," I called. One of them looked uncomfortable. "Morning. What are you all surveying?" He glanced toward another man before answering. "Just following the plans we were given." "What plans?" He hesitated. "The subdivision boundary." I frowned. "The subdivision ends at that fence." He studied the paperwork again. "According to this map." He stopped talking. "What?" He folded the papers shut. "You should probably speak with the developer." Something about the way he avoided eye contact bothered me. That evening, I pulled my original property survey from the safe inside the house. The measurements matched exactly what I'd always known. Nothing had changed, or so I thought. 2 weeks later, the first strange letter arrived. It wasn't from the county. It wasn't from the developer. It came from the Silver Creek Estates Homeowners Association. I almost laughed when I opened it. The letter welcomed me as a newly recognized member of the HOA, and informed me that my property was now subject to community covenants, architectural standards, annual assessments, and mandatory compliance inspections. I read it 3 times, convinced someone had mailed it to the wrong address. Then I noticed my legal property description printed across the top. It was mine. Every word. I drove straight to the HOA management office the next morning. A young receptionist smiled politely. "How can I help you?" I laid the letter on the counter. "I think somebody made a mistake." She looked at the address. Her smile disappeared. One quick phone call later, a sharply dressed woman emerged from the back office. She extended her hand. "I'm Linda Mercer," she said pleasantly, "president of the Silver Creek Estates HOA." I shook it once. Barely. "I'm Ethan Walker." "I know exactly who you are," she replied. There was something unsettling about the confidence in her voice. I held up the letter. "My ranch has never been part of your subdivision." Linda smiled as though she were explaining something obvious to a child. "It is now." For a moment, I honestly thought she was joking. Then she slid a thick folder across the table. Inside were maps, documents, and county filing references, with my ranch highlighted in bright yellow. I looked back at her. "Where did you get these?" She leaned back in her chair, completely relaxed. "From the county." A cold knot settled in my stomach. If those records were real, then someone had changed something that should have been impossible. I stared at the highlighted map for several long seconds before looking back at Linda Mercer. "There has to be a mistake," I said, keeping my voice level. "My family has owned this ranch since 1948. We've never signed a single HOA agreement." Linda folded her hands neatly on the conference table. "Mr. Walker, whether you signed anything isn't really the issue." I frowned. "I'm pretty sure that's exactly the issue." Her smile never moved. "The county records indicate your property now falls within the expanded boundaries of Silver Creek Estates. Once the boundary adjustment was approved, every parcel inside those limits became subject to the community covenants." I slid the folder back toward her. "Then your records are wrong." "No," she replied calmly. Your understanding is... That sentence told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a strategy. I stood up. I'm going to the county clerk. Linda didn't even blink. I already expected you would. Her confidence bothered me more than her words. As I walked toward the door, she called after me. Oh, Mr. Walker. I turned around. You have 30 days to pay the outstanding HOA assessments. I laughed. Outstanding? I don't owe you a dime. She glanced at a spreadsheet on her desk. Actually, with late fees, interest, architectural violations, livestock violations, fence violations, and landscape penalties. She tapped a calculator. You currently owe $23,418. I stared at her. You fined cattle for existing. They're prohibited under community standards. This is a working ranch. It is, she answered. For now, the Kendall County Clerk's office wasn't more than 15 minutes away. I knew several employees by name, including Deputy Clerk Susan Harper, who had handled land records for years. When I showed her the HOA documents, the color drained from her face. Where did you get these? The HOA. She typed rapidly into her computer. The room grew quiet except for the clicking of keys. After nearly a minute, she stopped. Well, what? She turned the monitor toward me. According to the county database, my ranch was listed under a legal notation, connecting it to Phase 4 of Silver Creek Estates. I felt my stomach tighten. That's impossible. I've never seen anything like this, Susan admitted. These entries weren't here a few years ago. So who changed them? She hesitated. I can't answer that. Can you tell me when they were filed? She clicked through several records. Looks like about 18 months ago. 18 months? She nodded slowly. There are approval references attached. I leaned closer. Approved by who? She shook her head. Those supporting documents aren't in this file. Missing? I don't know. For the first time in years, Susan looked genuinely nervous. You should probably speak with an attorney. Within a week, certified letters began arriving almost daily. Notice of non-compliance. Final demand for payment. Mandatory property inspection. Every envelope carried another threat. Remove agricultural fencing. Remove livestock. Paint the barn. Replace the metal roof. Install decorative landscaping. Every demand became more ridiculous than the last. I ignored them all. Then one Saturday morning, 3 black SUVs pulled into my driveway. Linda stepped out first, followed by 4 HOA board members carrying clipboards. A private security guard walked behind them. I met them halfway across the yard. Morning, I said. Linda smiled. We're here for your compliance inspection. No, you're not. She glanced toward the security guard. According to HOA bylaws, we have inspection authority. You have authority over your neighborhood. She pointed toward my house. This property. I shook my head. You're not crossing that fence. One board member stepped forward aggressively. You don't have a choice. I do. He took another step. If you interfere with official HOA business, there will be consequences. I folded my arms. Try me. Linda sighed dramatically. Mr. Walker, please don't make this difficult. It already is. Without warning, the security guard reached for my gate latch. Don't, I said firmly. He ignored me. The latch clicked open. I stepped directly in front of him. You just trespassed. Linda immediately pulled out her phone. Call the sheriff, she told another board member. The homeowner is obstructing a lawful inspection. 20 minutes later, 2 county deputies arrived. One of them, Deputy Ramirez, listened carefully as Linda explained that I was refusing HOA officials legal access to community property. When she finished, he turned to me. Mr. Walker? I handed him my original deed. My family's owned this ranch for almost 80 years. He studied the document carefully. Linda interrupted. Deputy, that's outdated. Ramirez looked at her. You have newer ownership records? She handed him copies of the county filings. He compared both sets of paperwork, his expression growing more confused with every page. Finally, he looked up. I've got 2 official documents that completely contradict each other. Linda crossed her arms. Ours are the current records, I answered quietly. Mine are the original records. The deputy rubbed his forehead. This isn't something I'm deciding on the side of a county road. He handed both documents back. I'm treating this as a civil dispute until a court says otherwise. Linda's smile disappeared instantly. So you're refusing to remove him? I'm refusing to remove anyone. As the deputies drove away, Linda stopped beside her SUV. She lowered her sunglasses and stared at me with open hostility. You've embarrassed this board, I shrugged. You did that yourselves. Her voice turned ice cold. "This isn't over." "I know," she smiled, a smile that carried no warmth at all. "It won't end until you lose this ranch." I watched the convoy disappear down the road. For weeks, I'd believed this was about HOA fines. Standing there in the Texas heat, I finally realized it was something far more dangerous. They didn't want my compliance. They wanted my land. For the first time since this nightmare had begun, I admitted something to myself. I couldn't fight this alone. The paperwork coming from the HOA looked official. The county database showed records that contradicted my own deed. Even the deputies couldn't tell which documents were legitimate. If I kept trying to handle it myself, I was exactly where Linda Mercer wanted me, reacting instead of investigating. The following Monday, I drove to San Antonio to meet an attorney named Daniel Brooks. Daniel wasn't the flashy television kind of lawyer. He was 62, wore worn cowboy boots with every suit he owned, and had spent nearly 4 decades handling Texas property disputes. His office walls weren't covered with expensive artwork. They were covered with framed land surveys dating back to the 1800s. That immediately told me I was in the right place. He spent nearly an hour reading every document without saying a word. Finally, he leaned back. "Mr. Walker," "Ethan," he nodded. "Ethan, either your family somehow gave away part of this ranch without anyone knowing," he paused, "or somebody has been altering public records." I felt my pulse quicken. Can they do that? They shouldn't be able to. But I've learned never to confuse impossible with unlikely. He slid one of Linda's documents across the desk. "Notice something?" I studied it. "No." "The legal description. What about it?" He pointed at one paragraph. "They changed only 7 words. I frowned. 7 words? They're small enough that most people would never notice. He grabbed my grandfather's original deed. "These 7 words shift the western boundary almost 200 acres. I stared at him. 200 acres? He nodded. "And those 200 acres happen to connect your ranch directly to the HOA's future expansion plans." For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally, I asked the question that had been bothering me for weeks. Why would they need my land? Daniel walked over to a large county zoning map hanging on the wall. He circled the area surrounding my ranch. "Developers don't just build houses." He traced another line. "They build shopping centers." Another line. "Utilities." Another. "Road access." Then he tapped the center. "And sometimes they need one property to connect everything else." He looked directly at me. "Your ranch isn't the obstacle, it's the key." Daniel immediately hired an independent licensed surveyor named Maria Alvarez, whose reputation was known throughout Central Texas. Maria arrived at my ranch 3 days later, carrying equipment that looked sophisticated enough to map the moon. Unlike the previous survey crew I'd seen months earlier, she explained every step she took. By sunset, she had one conclusion. "The fences are exactly where they've been for decades." I asked, "How can you tell?" She smiled. "Because your grandfather was obsessive." She pointed towards several iron survey pins, buried beneath layers of soil. "These original monuments are still here." She uncovered another, and another. Every marker matched the legal survey recorded generations earlier. None matched the HOA's new maps. Maria looked genuinely puzzled. "Someone didn't move the land. They moved the paperwork." Daniel wasn't satisfied. He filed formal requests for every county filing connected to Silver Creek Estates over the previous 5 years. Boxes of records began arriving: meeting minutes, subdivision plats, engineering reports, environmental permits, planning commission documents. For 2 straight weeks we read page after page until our eyes blurred. Most of it was ordinary. Then Daniel stopped turning pages. "What is it?" I asked. He held up a planning map. "Look." Running straight through my western pasture was a proposed emergency access road for the subdivision's planned Phase 5 expansion. The road couldn't exist unless my ranch became part of the HOA. Suddenly, every fine made sense. Every inspection, every threat, every fabricated violation. They weren't trying to collect dues. They were trying to pressure me into abandoning land they couldn't legally buy. But Daniel wasn't smiling. He kept flipping through another stack. Minutes later, he froze again. "This? What? Shouldn't exist." He carefully removed a faded approval letter. The signature authorizing the boundary change belonged to a county planning director who had retired 3 years before the document was supposedly signed. I leaned forward. "You're saying..." I'm saying someone used the name of a retired public official. He examined the signature under a magnifying glass. It doesn't even match. A chill ran down my spine. Forgery. Not a clerical mistake, not negligence. Forgery. Just as Daniel reached for his phone, his assistant rushed into the office holding a certified envelope. It just arrived. The return address made my stomach tighten. Silver Creek Estates Homeowners Association. Daniel opened it. Inside was a notice stating that, because I had failed to comply with repeated lawful demands, the HOA would begin legal proceedings to seize my ranch through court-ordered enforcement. Attached to the notice was something even more disturbing. A copy of the very forged approval letter we had just proven couldn't possibly be genuine. Daniel looked at me, then back at the document. "They're so confident," he said quietly. "They've just submitted forged evidence against you." He reached for the phone. "No," I asked. "No?" He met my eyes. "We're not just defending your ranch anymore." He held up the forged document. "We're about to expose a felony." Daniel wasted no time. Within an hour of identifying the forged approval letter, he contacted the Kendall County District Attorney's Office and requested an emergency meeting. He also filed preservation notices with the county clerk, requiring every record connected to Silver Creek Estates expansion to be secured before anything could mysteriously disappear. "I've seen too many cases where files vanish after someone starts asking the right questions," Daniel told me as we left his office. I nodded. So have they. The next morning, we met with Assistant District Attorney Rebecca Lawson and 2 investigators from the county's Public Integrity Unit. Daniel laid the forged approval letter on the conference table. "This signature belongs to former Planning Director Harold Simmons." One investigator adjusted his glasses. "I remember Simmons. He retired years ago." Daniel slid another document beside it. "This letter is dated 3 years after his retirement." The room fell silent. The investigator compared the signatures. "They're not even close." Rebecca looked at me. "Mr. Walker, has anyone else tried to pressure you into giving up the property?" I thought back over the past several months. The HOA fines, the inspections, the threats, the eviction notices, the public meetings where they called me a deadbeat. And, I added quietly, they kept telling me I'd eventually have no choice but to leave. Rebecca made several notes. "This is beginning to look like more than a property dispute." Daniel answered before I could. "It looks like a coordinated fraud." While the investigators dug into the county records, Maria Alvarez continued surveying my ranch. 2 days later, she called us to the western pasture. "You need to see this." She pointed to a rusted metal survey marker, buried nearly 8 inches below the surface. Stamped into the steel were the words, U.S. Geological Survey, 1951. Maria smiled. "This monument predates the subdivision by over 70 years. She uncovered 3 more markers. Each one matched the original federal survey. Each one confirmed my property's historic boundaries beyond any reasonable dispute. Daniel photographed every marker. "This destroys their entire boundary claim." I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Hope. It lasted less than 24 hours. The retaliation began the following Friday. Someone created a social media page titled, "Protect Silver Creek from Illegal Ranch Operations." They posted aerial photos of my property. They claimed I was violating environmental laws. They accused me of polluting nearby streams. One post even suggested I was hiding unpaid taxes. None of it was true. By Saturday morning, local community groups were sharing the posts. My phone wouldn't stop ringing. Some callers wanted my side of the story. Others simply called me a criminal. When I drove into town for feed, conversations stopped the moment I entered the store. People stared. A man I'd known for 15 years approached me cautiously. "Ethan." "Yeah? I don't know what's true anymore." That hurt more than I expected. Because uncertainty spreads faster than truth, the attacks became personal. Someone cut the lock on my front gate. Anonymous complaints were filed with the county about animal neglect. State inspectors showed up twice in 1 week. Both inspections found nothing. Then my insurance company called. "We've received reports claiming your property is involved in ongoing legal fraud." I nearly laughed. "They're trying to pressure you into dropping my policy." The representative hesitated. "We're simply conducting a review." What the HOA wanted. Death by 1,000 cuts. 3 nights later, I woke to the sound of tires on my gravel driveway. I grabbed a flashlight and walked onto the porch. A black pickup accelerated away before I could identify the driver. In its place sat a wooden stake driven into the ground. A single envelope was nailed to it. Inside was one typed sentence: "Sell the ranch." This is your last chance. No signature, no return address, just the message. I carried it straight to Daniel the next morning. He studied the paper carefully. They're panicking. I frowned. This feels like confidence. No, he shook his head. Confident people don't send anonymous threats. He placed the letter into an evidence bag. People who know they're losing do. Later that afternoon, Daniel received a phone call from the public integrity investigator. His expression changed instantly. What happened? I asked after he hung up. They executed a search warrant. Where? The HOA management office. My heartbeat quickened. What did they find? Daniel slowly smiled for the first time since we'd met. Computers, financial records, internal emails. He paused. And a deleted folder that wasn't actually deleted. What was in it? He looked directly at me. Draft versions of the forged property maps. I couldn't speak. Daniel continued. The metadata shows exactly who edited them and when. He closed the file on his desk. Ethan, this case just changed. How? Until today we suspected fraud. He leaned forward. Now we can prove it. Outside his office window, reporters were already gathering on the sidewalk, their cameras pointed toward the courthouse across the street. The lawsuit over my ranch was still scheduled to begin Monday morning. But now it wasn't just about whether I would lose my land. It was about whether an entire HOA board had built its power on criminal deception, and whether a courtroom was about to expose every last piece of it. By the time Monday morning arrived, the Kendall County Courthouse looked more like the scene of a high-profile criminal trial than a civil property dispute. News vans lined both sides of the street. Satellite dishes pointed toward the courthouse steps. Reporters rehearsed their introductions, while camera crews adjusted tripods in the July heat. I parked my old pickup across the street and sat behind the steering wheel for a moment, staring at the building. Daniel noticed. Nervous? I let out a slow breath. I've worked cattle in thunderstorms. I've pulled my dad out of a flipped tractor. I've buried family members on this ranch. I looked at him. But I've never been this nervous. He smiled. Good. I frowned. Good. It means you understand what's at stake. The courtroom was already full when we walked inside. Neighbors from Silver Creek Estates occupied nearly every bench. Some looked embarrassed. Others still glared at me as though I was somehow responsible for everything that had happened. At the defense table sat Linda Mercer and the rest of the HOA board. For the first time since I'd met her, Linda didn't look confident. She kept whispering to the HOA's attorney, Richard Ellis, while nervously tapping a pen against the table. When she looked up and saw Daniel carrying several thick evidence boxes, the color left her face. The bailiff called the room to order. All rise. Judge Margaret Holloway entered and took her seat. We're here today regarding Walker versus Silver Creek Estates Homeowners Association. She scanned both sides of the courtroom. I understand additional evidence has recently been disclosed. Daniel stood. Yes, Your Honor. Richard Ellis immediately rose. The defense objects to any evidence produced after discovery deadlines. Judge Holloway adjusted her glasses. Counselor, if the newly discovered evidence concerns potential fraud, this court intends to hear it. Ellis slowly sat down. The HOA presented its case first. Ellis argued that my ranch had been lawfully incorporated into the subdivision through a county-approved boundary amendment. He displayed the same maps Linda had shown me months earlier. He submitted copies of unpaid HOA assessments totaling more than $80,000 after penalties and interest. Then he pointed directly at me. Mr. Walker has refused every lawful request for compliance. Linda nodded confidently. For a brief moment, it looked convincing until Daniel stood. Your Honor, the plaintiff calls Maria Alvarez. Maria calmly walked to the witness stand. After being sworn in, Daniel asked only one question. Ms. Alvarez, are you a licensed Texas land surveyor? I am. He handed her an enlarged survey. Did you personally inspect Mr. Walker's property? Yes. What did you find? Maria pointed to the display. I located 4 original federal survey monuments dating back to 1951 and 6 county survey markers installed decades before Silver Creek Estates existed. Can those monuments legally be moved? No. Did they match Mr. Walker's original deed? Exactly. And did they match the HOA's boundary map? She looked toward the jury box. Not even close. A murmur spread through the courtroom. Daniel's next witness was Deputy County Clerk Susan Harper. She testified that the county database contained records adding my ranch to the subdivision, but that several supporting approval documents were missing when she first searched for them.
Did that concern you? Daniel asked.
Very much.
Why? County property records don't normally lose approval documents,
Ellis objected.
Speculation.
Overruled, Judge Holloway replied.
Then came the moment Daniel had been waiting for.
He held up the approval letter bearing former planning director Harold Simmons's signature. Your Honor, we'd like to compare this document with authenticated signatures provided by Mr. Simmons. Judge Holloway nodded.
Daniel placed enlarged copies on monitors throughout the courtroom.
Even from where I sat, the differences were obvious. Different handwriting, different initials, different signature flow. Daniel turned toward the witness stand. Ms. Harper, is this the signature used by Harold Simmons during his time in office?
No.
Are you certain? I processed hundreds of his filings. She looked directly at the document.
That isn't his signature.
The courtroom fell completely silent.
Linda shifted uneasily in her chair.
Richard Ellis leaned over and whispered something urgently to her. She didn't answer. Daniel wasn't finished. Your Honor, with the court's permission, we'd like to introduce digital forensic evidence obtained under search warrant. Judge Holloway nodded. A county investigator took the stand carrying a laptop. He connected it to the courtroom display. On the screen appeared a folder recovered from the HOA management office. The investigator clicked it open. Inside were multiple versions of the same subdivision map. Each version contained progressively altered property boundaries. One file included editing history. Another displayed user information. Daniel spoke quietly. Can you identify the account that created these edits? The investigator zoomed in. Yes. Every eye in the courtroom followed the cursor as it stopped over a single name. Linda Mercer. Gasps echoed across the room. Linda's attorney slowly closed his notebook. Judge Holloway stared at the screen for several long seconds before looking toward the defense table. Mrs. Mercer. Her voice was calm, but unmistakably serious. Would you care to explain why your computer contains draft versions of the very property records your association claims were official county documents? Linda opened her mouth. No words came out. The courtroom waited. So did the judge. And in that crushing silence, everyone realized the case had just taken a devastating turn. Though the court had not yet announced its final decision, no one spoke. The silence in Judge Margaret Holloway's courtroom felt heavier than any argument that had been made all morning. Linda Mercer sat frozen at the defense table, her attorney staring down at his legal pad as if the answers might somehow appear between the lines. Judge Holloway broke the silence. Mrs. Mercer, I'm asking you one final time. She leaned forward. Did you create or authorize the creation of these altered property maps? Linda swallowed hard. I relied on information provided by others. That wasn't my question. I trusted the documents I received. Judge Holloway's expression didn't change. So your answer is no. Linda looked toward her attorney. He slowly shook his head, silently advising her not to say another word. I invoke my Fifth Amendment right, she whispered. A wave of murmurs swept through the gallery. Judge Holloway raised her gavel. Order! The room fell quiet again. Daniel stood. Your Honor, the plaintiff has no further witnesses. Richard Ellis remained seated. After several seconds, he rose reluctantly. The defense has no additional evidence. Even he knew the case was over. Judge Holloway reviewed her notes for nearly 10 minutes. No one moved. The only sounds were the turning of pages and the quiet hum of the courtroom's air conditioner. Finally, she looked up. The court has reviewed the testimony, the authenticated property records, the survey evidence, and the digital forensic evidence. She paused. It is the finding of this court that Mr. Ethan Walker is the sole lawful owner of the disputed ranch property. Relief washed over me, but she wasn't finished. The court further finds that the purported boundary amendment relied upon by Silver Creek Estates Homeowners Association is unsupported by valid county authorization and is inconsistent with the original recorded surveys. She turned toward Linda. The evidence presented strongly indicates that false documents were created and used in an attempt to assert control over property that was never part of the Homeowners Association. Linda lowered her head. Judge Holloway continued. Accordingly, every lien, assessment, fine, and enforcement action issued by the HOA against Mr. Walker is declared null and void. A few people in the gallery quietly applauded before the bailiff restored order. Then came the sentence none of us expected. Based upon the evidence introduced in open court, this matter is referred to the Kendall County District Attorney for criminal prosecution. She looked toward the sheriff. Sheriff Collins. He stood immediately. The individuals identified in the pending arrest warrants may be taken into custody. For one heartbeat, no one moved. Then deputies stepped toward the defense table. Linda's chair scraped loudly across the floor. "This is ridiculous," she shouted. "You can't arrest us over a misunderstanding." Sheriff Collins calmly removed a folded document from his pocket. "These warrants are for alleged conspiracy, forgery, tampering with governmental records, attempted theft of real property, and filing fraudulent instruments." As he finished reading, deputies placed handcuffs on Linda and the other board members. The metallic click echoed through the courtroom. No one said a word. The same neighbors who had once whispered that I was refusing to follow the rules now watched in stunned silence as the HOA leadership was escorted through the center aisle. Several reporters rushed from the courtroom to break the story. The investigation expanded quickly. Over the following weeks, county investigators uncovered internal emails discussing plans to bring the Walker parcel into Phase 5 by any means necessary. Financial records revealed that several board members had accepted undisclosed consulting payments from the subdivision's developer while voting on expansion proposals. Those conflicts had never been disclosed to homeowners. Faced with overwhelming evidence, the developer withdrew from the project and terminated its relationship with the HOA. Without its leadership, and under mounting legal pressure, Silver Creek Estates Homeowners Association voted to dissolve. A court-appointed receiver took over its remaining affairs until everything was legally wound down. Many homeowners were shocked. Others were furious that they had paid dues to a board that had abused its authority. Several neighbors who had once avoided me drove out to the ranch. One older man removed his hat. "Ethan," he said quietly, "I believed what they told us." I shook his hand. "They fooled a lot of people." He nodded. "I'm sorry." For the first time in months, I felt the weight begin to lift. A week later, I rode my horse to the highest hill on the ranch just before sunset. The same fields stretched to the horizon. The same fences stood where my grandfather had built them. The wind moved through the oak trees exactly as it had when I was a boy. I looked across the land and smiled. Dad had asked me for one thing before he died. "Don't let anybody take this place." I had kept my promise. A year has passed since that day in court, and every morning I still wake before sunrise, pour a cup of black coffee, and step onto the porch overlooking the ranch. The cattle graze peacefully, the old red barn still stands proudly beneath the live oaks, and the same Texas wind carries memories of the generations who came before me. People often ask whether I feel angry about everything that happened. The truth is, I don't. Anger fades. Gratitude lasts. What stays with me is the lesson my grandfather tried to teach me all those years ago. The truth may take time to catch up, but it has a way of standing its ground. If I had given in to fear, accepted the false accusations, or walked away simply because the pressure became unbearable, my family's history would have disappeared with the stroke of a pen. Instead, patience, good legal advice, and documented facts proved stronger than intimidation. That experience also reminded me that real communities aren't built by people chasing power. They're built by honest neighbors who respect one another and are willing to stand up when something isn't right. Thank you so much for spending your time with me and following this story from beginning to end. I truly appreciate every one of you who watches, listens, and supports stories like this. Now I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever dealt with an HOA, a difficult neighbor, or a property dispute that taught you an unforgettable lesson? Share your experience in the comments. I read as many as I can. If you enjoyed this story, please like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss future stories of justice, resilience, and unforgettable neighborhood battles. Until next time, take care of the people you love, protect what's rightfully yours, and never underestimate the power of the truth. The end.